Tonight, we are reaching what is theoretically the culmination of the finale of the Farseer universe, but I'm not going to say that because I took a lot of crap when I told Ursula Gwynn that she'd have let them put the last book of Earthsea on her fourth book and regretted it for years. Especially since when she finished the first trilogy, we were like, more. And they wait quite a while, and then we finally got the second trilogy, and then Fitz was still alive. I was like, hey, you know. Well, I mean, you might recall where the White Prophet kindly tells Fitz the part about the role of the catalyst. You know, like there's this wagon barreling down the road, and it's about to crash and kill everybody, but there's a rock in the road, which diverts the rock, but of course the rock still gets run over. So Fitz isn't really having that soft, comfortable life of nobility some of his peers might have envisioned, and he's been back here and had just a few things go wrong, like, you know, wife dies on him, kid gets kidnapped, and I told Megan in the middle of book 2.
Spoilers!
I'm assuming they've read book 2 by now.
I don't know.
How many folks have not read the second book in the trilogy? Come on. You gotta grade, so it's like, you know, 4 years ago on a TV show, you gotta give me some credit. I haven't been giving you spoilers on the third book. Yet. I wasn't done. All I was going to say is that I knew that a certain character was not dead because otherwise Fitz would carve the whole world apart. And that would be the kind of bloodbath Megan doesn't usually deal with. Robin does not usually, shall we say, slaughter the entire cast of her books. Even though I occasionally tease her about this, it doesn't generally happen. Anyway, she's here. We would have had her a few days ago, but she had to go visit the UK. But finally here for Assassin Slate. Please welcome Robin Hobb.
This is chronic here. Before I start doing a reading, I'm going to mention that we do have some of the, and end up getting harder and harder to find, the second and third volumes of the Subterranean Press editions. They still have a few here at the store. They don't have Assassin's Apprentice, but they do have Royal Assassin and Assassin's Quest. So I just thought I would let you know that they're not going to be around much longer if that's something you really wanted to acquire. So, Assassin's Fate. It's the third and final book in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. The action picks up immediately after the end of Fool's Quest. And I'm going to read a little bit from the first chapter in hopes of not doing too much in the way of spoilers for people who haven't read the second book. And so it starts out with a prologue. And the chapter is Chapter 1, Bee Stings. The map room at Basilval displayed a territory that included much of the Six Duchies, part of the Mountain Kingdom, a large section of Chalced, and lands along both sides of the Rainwild River. I suspect that it defines for us the boundaries of the ancient Elderling's territory at the time the maps were created. I have been unable to inspect the map room of the abandoned Elderling city now known as Kelsingraw personally, but I believe it would be very similar. On the Azlewal map were marked points that corresponded to standing stones within the Six Duchies. I think it fair to assume that the identical markings and locations in the mountains, Rainwilds, and even Chalced indicate standing stones that are skill portals. The conditions of those foreign portals are largely unknown, and some skill users caution against attempting to employ them until we have physically journeyed there and witnessed that they are in excellent condition. For the skill portal stones within the Six Duchies and the Mountain Kingdom, it seems prudent not only to send skilled couriers to visit every site, but also to require every duke to see that any such standing stones are maintained upright. The couriers who visit each stone should document the content and condition of the runes on each face of the stone as well. In a few instances, we have found standing stones that do not correspond to a marking on the Azlewal map. We do not know if they were raised after the map was created, or if they are stones that no longer function. We must continue to regard them with caution as we do all use of Elderling magic. We cannot consider ourselves to be masters of it until we can duplicate their artifacts. Skill pearls, Shade Falstar. I ran. I hiked up the heavy white fur coat I wore and I ran. I was already too warm and it dragged and snagged on every twig or trunk I passed. Behind me, Dwaylia was shouting for someone to catch her, catch her. I could hear the Chalcedian making mooing noises. He galloped wildly, once passing so close to me that I had to dodge him. My thoughts raced faster than my feet. I remembered being dragged by my captors into a skill pillar. I even recalled how I had bitten the Chalcedian, hoping to make him really shun. And he had, but he'd held on to me and followed us into the darkness of the skill pillar. No shun had I seen, nor that servant who had been last in our chain of folk. Perhaps both she and Shun had been left behind. I hoped Shun would escape her, or perhaps had escaped her. I remembered the cold of a winter clutching at us as when we fled. But now we were somewhere else, and instead of the deep cold, I felt only chill. The snow had retreated into narrow fingers of dirty white in the deeper shade of the trees. The forest smelled of early spring, but no branches had yet leafed out. How did one leap from winter in one place to spring in another? Something was very wrong, but I had no time to consider it. I had a more pressing concern. How did one hide in a leafless forest? I knew I could not outrun them. I had to hide. I hated the coat fiercely. I could not pause to wriggle out of the bottom of it, for my hands felt as clumsy as fish flippers, but I could not possibly hide from my pursuers in a huge white fur coat. So I fled, knowing I could not escape, but too frightened to let them reclaim me. Choose a place to take a stand. Not where they can corner you, but not where you can surround you either. Find a weapon, a stick, a rock, anything. If you cannot escape them, make them pay as dearly as you can for capturing you. Fight them all the way. Yes, Wolf Father. I spoke his name in my mind to give me courage. I reminded myself that I was the child of a wolf, even if my teeth and claws were pathetic things. I would fight. But I was already so tired. How could I fight? I could not understand what the passage through the stones had done to me. Why was I so weak and so tired? I wanted to fall where I was and lie still. I longed to let sleep claim me, but I dared not. I could hear them calling to one another, shouting and pointing at me. Time to stop running, time to make my stand. I chose my spot, a cluster of 3 trees, their trunks so close together that I could dodge between them, but none of my pursuers could easily follow me. I could hear at least 3 people crashing through the bushes behind me. How many might there be? I tried to calm myself enough to think. Dwaylia, their leader, the woman who had smiled so warmly as she stole me from my home. She had dragged me through the skill pillar. And Vindelier, the boy man who could make people forget what they'd experienced. He had come through the stone. Kerf was a Chalcedian sellsword, but his mind was so scrambled from our skill journey that either he was no danger to anyone, or he might kill any of us. Who else? Alaria, who would unquestionably do whatever Dwaylia told her, as would Reppin, who had so harshly crushed my hand as we came through the pillar. It was a much smaller force than Dwaylia had started with, but they still outnumbered me 5 to 1. I crouched behind one of the trees, pulled my arms from the sleeves of the heavy fur robe, and at last wriggled and lifted until I could slide out of it. I picked it up and threw it as far as I could, which was not far. Should I run on? I knew I could not. My stomach was doubling and twisting uneasily, and I had a stitch in my side. This was as far as I could go. A weapon. There was nothing, only a fallen branch. The thick end was no bigger around than my wrist, and it diverged into 3 limbs at the other end. A poor weapon, more rake than staff. I took it up. Then I pressed my back to one of the trees, hoping against hope that my pursuers would see the coat and pass me by so that I could double back and find a better hiding spot. Excuse me. They were coming. Dwaylia shouted in gasps. I know you are frightened, but don't run. You will starve and die without us. A bear will eat you. You need us to survive. Come back, Bee. No one will be angry at you. Then I heard the lie as she turned her fury on her followers. Oh, where is she? Alaria, you fool, get up. None of us feels well, but without her we cannot go home. Then, letting her anger win, Bee, stop being foolish. Come back here right now. Vindelier, hurry up. If I can run, so can you. Find her, fog her. As I stood behind the tree, trying to make my terrified breathing as quiet as I could, I felt Vindelier reaching for me. I pushed hard to make my thought wall strong, as my father had shown me. I gritted my teeth and bit down on my lip to keep him out. He was making memories of sweet, warm foods and hot soup and fragrant, fresh bread at me. All those things I wanted so much, that if I let him make me think about them, he would find a way in. No. Raw meat. Meat frozen onto bones, gnawing it off with my back teeth. Mice with their fur on and their little crunchy skulls. Wolf food. Wolf food. Strange how delicious it sounded. I gripped my stick with both hands and waited. Should I stay hidden and hope they would run past me, or step out and strike the first blow? I did not get a choice. I saw Ilaria go stumbling past my hiding place several trees away. She halted, looked stupidly at the white fur on the ground, and then as she turned to call back to the others, she saw me. "She's here! I found her!" She pointed at me with a shaking hand. I set my feet shoulder width apart as if I were going to play at knife fighting with my father, and waited. She stared at me, and then sank down in a crumpled heap, her own white coat folding around her, and made no attempt to rise. "I found her," she called in a weaker voice. She flapped a limp hand at me. I heard footsteps to my left. "Look out," Ilaria gasped, but she was too late. I swung my branch as hard as I could, connected with Dwalia's face, and then danced back to the right between the trees. I set my back to one trunk and took up my stance again, branch at the ready. Dwalia was shouting, but I refused to look and see if I'd heard her. Perhaps I'd been lucky enough to put out one of her eyes. But Vindalia was lumbering toward me, his doltish smile beaming. "Brother, there you are. You're safe. We found you." "Stay back or I'll hurt you," I threatened him. I didn't want to hurt him. He was a tool of my enemy, but left to himself, I doubted he had any malice. Not that a lack of malice would prevent him from hurting me. "Brother," he said, drawing the word out sadly. It was a rebuke, but a gentle one. I realized he was radiating gentleness and fondness at me, friendship and comfort. No, he was not truly any of those things. "Stay back," I commanded him. The Chalcedian lolloped past us, undulating as he went, and I could not tell if he deliberately or accidentally jostled against the little man. Vindalia tried to avoid him but stumbled and fell flat with a mournful cry, just as Dwalia rounded the tree trunks. Her hands were extended toward me like claws, her lips pulled back from her bloodied teeth as if she would seize me in her jaws. Two-handed, I swung my branch at her, willing it to knock her head from her shoulders. Instead, it broke, and the jagged end dragged across her reddened face, trailing a line of blood. She flung herself at me, and I felt her nails dig into my flesh right through my worn clothing. I literally tore myself free of her grip. She kept part of my sleeve as I squeezed between the tree trunks. Repin was waiting there. Her fish-gray eyes met mine. Hatred gave way to a mindless glee as she leaped toward me. I dodged sideways, leaving her to embrace the tree face first. She hit, but she was sprighter than I thought. One of her feet hooked mine. I jumped high, cleared it, but stumbled on the uneven ground. Ilaria had regained her feet. She wailed wildly as she threw herself against me. Her weight carried me to the ground, and before I could wriggle out, I felt someone step hard on my ankle. I grunted, then cried out as the pressure increased. It felt as if my bones were bending, as if they would snap at any instant. I shoved Ilaria off me, but the moment she was clear, Repin kicked me in the side, hard, without getting off my ankle. Her foot slammed all the air out of me. Tears I hated swelled in my eyes. I thrashed for a moment, then wrapped myself around her legs and struggled to get her off my ankle. But she grabbed my hair and shook my head wildly. Hair ripped from my scalp, and I could not focus my vision. "Beat her," I heard Dwalia's voice. It shook with some strong emotion. Anger, pain, with this. And I think I'll stop there. So, just go right away and open it up for questions or comments. Or we can just go sign books.
One question?
Yes.
Are you going to get any more Ring Wild Dragon?
At this point, I don't know. It was a very long and hard book to write, and I'm just kind of recharging my batteries right now. In the past, I said, no, that's the last book, and then I proved myself wrong more than once, so I learned to say, I don't know.
I, for one, would love to see a series about me.
Well, What I always say about it, and what I strongly feel is I wouldn't write a book simply to set it in the same world. I would have to have a really compelling plot, something I would want to write even if I'd never written any other books in this world. So I'm kind of waiting on the news. Yes?
I've read all of your books, and I'm reading this last one on my Kindle, and I'm just thrilled to see you. I called the library downtown. I says, she lives right down in Tacoma. How come you don't ever have her here?
Well, you know, it is Tacoma.
and they emailed me back and thanked me for my request. And then I saw you in the paper for here, and I said, well, I had to come and see you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I had no idea that you put it in the paper, Dwayne, so I'm very, very glad. Thank you. Yes.
What's it been like to have followed and written from the perspective of a character through so many stages of his life? I find it so remarkable rereading the story and to really have so much of growth and recognizing the different stages of Fitz as he is a child, as he is a teen, as he falls in love, as he matures, as he is flawed, and his relationships change, the characters rotate. It seems such a deeper connection than most even main characters. How did you achieve that, and how do you view that now as an author?
I really enjoyed being along for the ride with Fitz. It was fun to, it was more than fun. It was intriguing to try to put him through the same changes that I think all of us go through. I mean, when you're 8 years old and you get a great idea to put a sail on your wagon and go down the hill, and then you look back at it at 16 and say, I'm lucky I lived through that. And then you're 25 and you look back and say, what on earth was I thinking to date him? And it's the progression. It's remembering what it was like to experience something as a child, as a kid, as a young person, and then what it feels like when you look back on it 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later. Because we are all those people at once inside still. But it's the different perspectives you get on life that make him a very intriguing character to write. Yes?
I have kind of a similar question. I really admire how you seem to understand people so much better than a lot of authors. I mean, everybody that you write about, even minor characters that only appear in one chapter, they feel like real people that are really fleshed out. Like, how do you do that? Do you have any
What I try to remember is that they're not really minor characters. They're the major characters in a different story, and that story is intersecting briefly with Fitz's, but they have their own lives, their own motivations, their own self-interests. And when you look at a character and say, this character isn't just the innkeeper or isn't just the stable boy. He's got plans for tomorrow, you know, and the plan is not, I will take an arrow for you today. So, and to put on the characters and really try to see things from their point of view, even if I'm writing in a third person point of view, helps me take a look at them. So I'm going to drink a little water. I don't know why I'm choking up here. This is the fun of degenerative arthritis. That's better. Are there any other questions? Yes.
So the only other time I heard you speak, you mentioned how your novels are character driven, because I asked how you did this, how just what she said, how you capture us with people. Do you ever find yourself getting way into a novel and having the characters have to essentially shift the plot 180 degrees?
Some characters don't respect an outline, and the fool is definitely that character. And, he is suddenly saying or doing things that carry the plot sideways, and yet it's still following the strongest current of the story. And it's like writers will joke about it, they're saying, why isn't this book writing itself yet? But when you hit the point where the characters really are being true to themselves and taking the actions they actually would, it's a lot easier to write them, because you're following them through what's happening, rather than saying, okay, now you need to cross the room and go here. They're doing things, and it feels like they're just recording what they're doing. Yes?
And speaking of the Fool, like, he is such a dynamic character that I've tried to describe him to people who have never read the books before, and I can't even express to them exactly what kind of person he is. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you go about creating a character like that? Like, was there any particular inspiration for him?
I think that for me, that character creation happens in a part of my mind that I don't have necessarily conscious access to. For me, all the stories always do start out with a character who steps out onto an empty stage and starts talking. And as I've said before, it's like the camera pulls back, or like the spotlight brightens, and the rest of the world falls into place around the character. And it's mostly following the character and seeing what decisions they make and what happens to them and where they go. Usually I know when I start a book, I'll know the beginning, and I know the end, and I'll know a few points that are going to hit in between. But there's a lot of stuff that happens in between that surprises me.
I see the idea of gender cropping up a lot, especially with the Fool, and I just wonder if maybe in the time between the original books and this series, if maybe your approach has changed at all, or if you've added anything else, especially given how society looks at it differently.
Well, the Fool is who he is, and has been from the beginning. And when I'm writing a character, gender is almost never the most important thing about the character. It's a facet. It's like having green eyes, or being left-handed, or enjoying beautiful clothing, or being a farmhand. It's one facet of the character. So it's not like it's not like that's the first thing the character says to me. It's just part of the package they come with. Yes?
Hi, I am very, very, very excited to read this. I want to let you know that. And one of the things I really liked about your books from the first trilogy was that it felt like there was so much more going on behind the scenes. And it was almost like there was a diorama that was completely fleshed out, but we were just looking at it through a tiny slit, and we could try to look at it from multiple angles and stuff, but there was a lot more going on. I was wondering, do you feel like you have a lot more fleshed out that doesn't make it to the books, but it's helpful for you to flesh out what does make it to the book, to the characters in the book? I mean, is there a lot more going on? Do you have to work through that stuff on your own, or does it just sort of come to you as you're writing?
I think that is probably true for most writers, that we know a lot more about the characters in the world, and even the plot, that we can actually put on the page. And when I for a number of the books set in the realm of the Elderlings, I'm writing from first-person viewpoints, or I'm writing from a very tight third-person viewpoint, in which they can only convey to the reader what they actually already know themselves. And so there's a lot of things I know that are going on, but I can't say, meanwhile, over the next hill, the army was messing, because that viewpoint character has no idea of that. So I do think that most writers, we know a lot of things going on before the story starts. We know a lot of things that are happening to either side. I know what became of Hans, for instance. I know what Ketterkin was like as a child, but there's no way to fit that in there, or if I did, the story was like, it would spread out and fill the bookstore. And
We're okay with that.
so it's following the strongest current of the story and sticking, sometimes we jump years forward in the course of a book, and we can't tell you everything that happened every day, what they had for breakfast and what color shirt somebody put on. So we have to stick to the main, to move the story along, or it would be even longer than it is.
Do you actually have a physical Bible that you refer to, or is it just all in your?
I have a very scratchy and much written over timeline that started out as one sheet of graph paper, and it's now 3 of them taped together. As I'm writing the books, anytime I use a proper noun, I stop and open up the glossary and I put it in alphabetically, and I sometimes do a cut and paste of the description of the river or the town or the person. And I usually make a little notation, not by page number, because page numbers are going to change a lot, but that this happens in the scene where they first meet the giant or whatever it is, so that I've got a mental reference and I can go back. Because I will forget, who has red hair, who's left-handed, and keeping the ages so that characters age at the same rate gets really tricky.
Are there commercial pressures to produce some of those weaker currents? Maybe a Silmarillion of the 6 duchies?
Not really. I've been pretty much left to just decide what I wanted to write and where the story went. I've had 2 wonderful editors. I worked quite a few years with Anne Grell through a number of the books. And what is very, very rare in the writing world today, I have worked with Jane Johnson in the UK for over 30 years. So Jane first began editing me when I was still writing as Megan Lindholm, and she has been the editor for Robin Hobb through all of the books. She's had her hands on every single book. And that's pretty rare anymore, to have that long-term relationship. And it gives her the insight and the memory, which, and she catches the silly errors. I remember getting a manuscript back from her and written in blue pencil. This was back when we were still trading pencil papers back and forth, was, "You do know you have a dead man rowing the boat." And what it was yes, there was a character who had met his demise in the previous book, but I had grabbed that name out of my memory because it started with the same consonant as the character that I actually wanted. And that might have slid past a different person, but it didn't get past Jane. So that's not to say that we're entirely free of errors. I can think of several errors that I would blush if I had to admit, and I'm not going to admit them. They do occasionally get past us, get past the copy editors. We read these books so many times in the course of creating them that by the time I'm finished, I feel like I've written the most boring book in the world, because I can't keep my eyes open for one more pass. But extraordinary relationship with her. But no, she's never said, the next book you write has to be this. She will, encourage and say, oh, this Bee's a very interesting character. But she's never said, this is what we want from you and don't turn in anything else. She's not like that. She's a writer herself, so I think she has a great depth of understanding about it.
So, mentioning Megan Lindholm, in the Inheritance, you have a story in there about someone who's in this room, and I thought that was a great story.
Someone's in this room.
Dwayne. And there were 2 people in the world who knew the identity of Robin Hobb.
Oh, yeah, in the little, yeah, I thought you meant I used him as a character. I hadn't done that that he knows of anyway. No, Dwayne figured it out pretty early. I got this phone call and he was talking about this book he was reading, and at the time I wasn't telling anybody that I was writing under a different name. And he had figured it out and called me up and got me in a corner and made me confirm it. But then he kept the secret. And for, 2-3 years, something like that. And the other person that stumbled across it and figured it out by accident was Stephen Bruce, who also kept the secret. So I was very, very grateful to both of them.
Any movie deals?
From time to time, we've had some nibbles of interest, but I think making a movie is a very, very complicated process, and I'm not even sure that I want to embark on something like that. I think it would have to be somebody that I really trusted, and then I would have to make one of two choices, and the first is open your hand and let it go. Sign the contract and say, now you're going to take this as base material and you're going to make a movie that's your experience of having read this book. Or I would have to say, I want to be involved at every step, and then you don't have time to write. And what I am is a writer, I'm not a movie maker, so. Oh, that's interesting. I keep thumping this. What's that noise? Margaret?
Yes, I was just wondering now that you're more or less done with the other length books, if you have any idea what you would work on next.
I've actually, I owed Gardner Giswa a couple of stories. He's got 2 anthologies coming out. Well, the first one is called The Book of Swords, and I wrote a Robin Hobb story for that called Her Father's Sword. And then he has another book coming out called The Book of Magic, and I wrote Megan Lindholm's story for that. It's a contemporary urban fantasy set actually in present-day Tacoma. And I had a lot of fun writing that one. And so I'm working on a second story, but I can't decide if it's a story or a novella or a novel. So I'm just kind of seeing where it goes.
I had a question. That you used different names, was that a choice you made, or did the publisher want that when you were trying different styles of writing or different kind of genres? Urban versus,
When I started out writing as Megan Lindholm, I was all over the fantasy map. I did, a little bit of Sword to Sorcery with P. and Bandine. I did kind of a quasi-historical fantasy with the reindeer people. I did an contemporary urban fantasy with Wizard of the Pigeons. I was writing just anything that popped into my head and having a very good time. And then I turned in most of the manuscript for Assassin's Apprentice, and they said, this is very different from anything you've written as Megan Lindholm. Do you want to set it apart under a different pseudonym? And that actually sounded like a lot of fun to me. And there's a long history in fantasy and science fiction of having several names that you write under. And I still know a lot of authors who have a name for their romances, a name for their mysteries, a different name for fantasy. And it's basically like letting the reader know what to expect. If you think you're going to pick up a fantasy and you pick up a book by that author and it turns out it's a romance, you may be disappointed or at least unsettled. So it's a way of marking out what you're writing. In some of the earlier magazines, some of our really prolific short story writers were selling like 4 and 5 stories at a time to a magazine. And so the magazine actually had house names that they would stick on the stories so it didn't look like the entire magazine was written by one author. When you look back into it, it's really fascinating, actually, all the different pseudonyms that some of the writers have used.
There's only 1-2 authors in the whole thing. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes?
I'm curious, with your chapter prologues, how do you come up with those? Is it along the same linear place that you are with the story, or?
What they were is, when I was writing a really tight first-person viewpoint with Fitz, as I said, I can only tell the reader exactly what Fitz already knows. Sometimes there was a crucial piece of information that would not come up in a casual conversation, and it was something that the reader needed to know. Maybe it was something that had happened historically, or it was something about the skill pillars and the skill pillar map. And so some of those just occurred naturally. I'll put this information at the beginning of the chapter, and some of the chapters did not have prologues until I had done the first writing of the book, and then I would look back and say, okay, where do I have pieces of information missing? and where would it be most useful to the writer to insert them. So it was really, in some ways, a device for me to use because I was writing a very tight first person.
As a reader of your work and waiting for the next ones to come out, I also am interested in what you read and who you read, because oftentimes I hear from writers that that is what inspires them to continue in that vein. So who do you read?
Okay, let me think. In the last few months, I have reread Green Rider by Christian Britain, which is, it's marketed as a youngie. It's a very well-written, good adventure story. The Waking Land, The Waking Land by Callie Bates, thanks. And that one is fascinating to me. It's a fantasy, but it's the first time I've ever seen a story that took on Stockholm Syndrome in the narrator, which was a really cool thing to do. I'm just starting into Red Sister, and that's an author where I really always enjoy plunging into his worlds. They're very dark, but fascinating. What else? I read The Sultan's Wife, which is actually a historical one. There's no fantasy elements. It's actually written by Jane Johnson, my editor, my UK editor, and it's a bit from Moroccan history. What else? There's something else. Nevernight by J. Christoph. Yes, and that one is
Amazing.
It's a really good story. It's about it's a vengeance tale about a young woman that decides she's going to become an assassin to avenge something that happened, and I don't want to do too many spoilers for it. I'll say you could almost say it's kind of like Hogwarts, but with sex and violence. So if that doesn't make you rush out and buy Nevernight, I don't know what will. So.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes.
So you said that this was a really difficult book for you to write, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Like, how was it different from some of the other ones? Just because it was the last one in the whole line?
The three books in this trilogy, when you've got that much storyline behind you, there is a tremendous amount of checking and cross-checking. I actually bought all of my own books as e-books simply so I had a searchable database. So I could look back and say. So I could say, okay, I think that happened somewhere in these two chapters, and so I'll look for that character's name within these two chapters and refresh my memory, because there's a lot of story dragging behind it. There's a lot of detail, and my greatest fear was contradicting myself, or aging somebody, or doing something like that. And I don't think I did a perfect job of avoiding contradictions, but I did the best I could.
And with this being potentially the last Elderlings book, how does it feel? Does it feel odd to sort of be letting these characters go almost?
It feels terrible. I went into kind of a gulch, and so did my editor, and Jane and I were commiserating about it. It's like somebody moving away and never sending you a postcard again. So it's not the best feeling in the world.
For good feelings. Looking back on the three trilogies, maybe not including this book that we haven't all read yet, but are there any scenes that stand out to you as ones that not necessarily you yourself as a writer are proud of, but scenes that stick as ones that feel like real memories, that feel like good scenes that maintain themselves and outlast just the reading of the material itself, or the writing of the material?
The peculiar thing is that the story gets mixed up with actually my memories of my life at that time. So it's a weird amalgamation of what I was writing and what I was actually, where I was living and things. So it's like, I'll go somewhere and that scene comes back very vividly because it's tied to the place I was physically at when I was sitting there with a notebook and writing things down. So there is that. And some of the incidents do feel more like something I watched or experienced than something I wrote. So, but I think that happens to a lot of writers.
Hello. Years ago, when they first came out, I read the Ship trilogy, years ago. And then I reread it again as I was reading this trilogy. And the timeline just went right across. And by me rereading that series, it allowed me to really enjoy this trilogy. Because, you know, everything was...
It's all put together.
I appreciated that.
It was, there is an internal logic to why I chose the characters I chose, and in the Ship series, I needed characters who were there who were in the best position to observe and tell what was happening in the story, but also characters that I knew would be significant later. So I always...
The Dragon Keepers, that was very cool to go from the mad ships to the Dragon Keepers and then to this trilogy.
It's all hooked together, and sometimes I had to shift locale simply to say these events that are going to happen are going to have a big bearing on what happens next. And so when people tell me, oh, I skipped the rain ones.
The time is now 7:50, and the university bookstore will be closing in 10 minutes.
Oh, we ignore that.
I loved it when the dragon ate Elisa's husband.
No spoilers. I did too.
Yes.
How about graphic novels?
There are French graphic novels. The Soleil, which is actually the French division of Marvel, has published graphic novels of the Farseer trilogy and the Live Ships trilogy. So they do exist, and I've enjoyed paging through them. My French is very rudimentary, but even with my rudimentary French, I could follow every scene. It was really interesting to see it like storyboarded that way. Yes?
So as far as keeping everything straight, is it all just internal, or is it more like you have things posted on your wall in your office as far as like a graphic outline, or?
I have what's called the go back file on my computer, and when I'm going through, if I realize I have to go back and insert something, I will make a little note in the go back file. I'll step aside from the story and put it in the go back file, so that when I'm going back through the book for the second time, I can make a note and say, you know, this, I need to fix this, or I needed to insert this previous scene. But for the most part, it's all pretty much stored in my brain, which is why when you're writing the 17th book in the Farseer trilogy, I needed to have a searchable database to go back and refresh my memory of things. And I did do a lot of rereading of my own work, so. I'm waiting for Dwayne to call time or let me know how. Are we doing okay in time? Oh, okay, so. Okay. Yes?
Okay, sorry, I'm gonna bumble through this. When you write about kind of broad concepts, because I don't want to spoil it, like grief and parenthood, especially to me right now, like I read your books when I was 20, and loved the crap out of them, and then read them again 30, and just different things hit me out of nowhere, and I find that amazing. Like, how do you, do you write from like, so say if your character is going to experience something, you have to imagine what they're going to go through, or do you need like talk to friends, because the way you've captured some of these things is so amazing and it's so personal. Like, it just makes, it's very emotional kind of thing, especially with the grief, like, and the way Fitz thinks about the person, the character that he uses. I can't understand it sometimes. It creeps into his brain and he's always there, and it's just really.
I think that you know, when you try really hard as a writer to write from the bones out, when you say, you know, I can't step back from this story and be impersonal about it, a lot of stuff puts in. But I think it's also a lot of what does the reader bring to the book. And readers each have a unique experience of any book they read. If I say the river, everybody now has a mental image of the river, and it may be the first river that you really experienced as a river, and it might be something that's full of gray rock dust, or it may be something wide and slow-moving and muddy, or but everybody has a river, and you bring that to the book. And everybody has a horse and a dog, and everybody knows somebody with bushy eyebrows, and so when I give you a clue, you're actually probably bringing 70% of the description from your own background to the book, and also your own experiences. If I write a story about a sad experience, if you've had a similar sad experience, you bring all of that emotional impact with you into it. So the reader and the writer are actually partners in the story as you experience. Thank you.
Is your family excited that this series is potentially over? Or do you have like a really good boundary on not bleeding that in?
My family members are involved to varying degrees. A long time ago, long before I sold a novel, my husband and I made an agreement that he would not read any of my stories or books because he's simply too far inside the walls. So a criticism or a comment from him carries 20 times the rate of a New York Times review. Yeah. So that's worked very well for us. Then there are some of my kids have read my books. Some of them are simply not fantasy readers, and so they haven't read them. The intensity of the last few years of writing this trilogy has meant that it's very strange to come into the house from doing something and not immediately say, I have to hit the word processor and I need to stay there for 2 hours. Because it's like, I don't know what it's like. I think it's like moving from a house to an apartment and suddenly you don't have a lawn to mow or something like that. It's like this big piece of work that isn't central to my life right now, that isn't taking priority over mowing the lawn or sweeping the floor. I still haven't given my house a thorough cleaning, but I will get to that.
I was recently able to go back and read The Reindeer People and Wolf's Brother. I loved reading about a prehistoric mother taking care of a special needs child. But I was curious if you had a specific disorder in mind for Kirilu. I was never able to figure out what exactly he had.
I don't think I gave a specific thing. I just, he was just a person that comes at the world from a very different angle. And I suppose you could say on the spectrum from autism or Asperger's. But I didn't, specifically say I'm going to make sure I hit every possible symptom of this disorder for this character. Just to let him be that baffling, why on earth don't you have any common sense character.
Are you ever surprised when there's fan art or fan fiction about what you find there, or do you even look into it at all?
I mostly avoid it. Sometimes the fan art, there's been a great deal of it that I have very, very much enjoyed, and there's some artists that I have really cooperated with. That's Carol Craig standing next to you back there. So, but with Carol, it's a cooperative thing. I will say, you know, I want some custom book plates, and Carol puts her mind to it, and we get these lovely book plates that have my initial and a buck on it. Or with Crudy, who's a French friend of mine, who did some gorgeous maps and has done some wonderful fan art over on DeviantArt. So sometimes people, you know, send me directly a piece of art they've done, and it's always fascinating to me to see the different takes on the characters, even when it's something like Alejandro Colucci versus John Howe. And so, you know, with professional artists, everybody brings their own lens to it. And I think it's pretty wonderful, actually. I was looking at is it the Polish cover. Kat's not here right now, but we were looking at it. It was a really great, I think it's the Polish cover that has Fitz and the wolf, and then it has this very young, pale, blonde child. And it's this wonderful, wonderful cover. And sometimes I don't see the foreign covers at all for years. The Japanese covers are very interesting because it's almost a manga-like take on the characters. So I mean, no, it's fascinating for me to look at how the characters appear to different artists. When I was traveling in France, I was given a piece of art in which they look almost like Laplanders, reindeer herders, in which, you know, Ketterkin is wearing this beautiful embroidered coat. So everybody brings their own lens to it.
Now closed. Thank you for shopping with us, and have a great evening.
He's got to go home.
Like what you were saying to her about how the reader brings so much to the book, and in your work it seems like you really trust the reader, and you trust yourself as a writer. I mean, there's plot lines sometimes that you mention and then you don't follow. I mean, sometimes you leave things not completely finished, and then you'll pick that up 4 books later. It's so cool to me how you do that, how you trust the process, you trust the reader, you don't feel like you have to spell everything out. When you were first starting out, how did you learn to do that? How did you learn to trust yourself? Were there,
I've got a file of rejection slips. So a lot of it was simply trial and error, and then and sometimes it's working with 2 editors, working with Anne Grell at Bantam for the U.S. editions, working with Jane Johnson for the U.K. editions. And a lot of times I would hear from Jane, oh, you don't have to explain that. People will know what you mean. Don't get stuck explaining that for 5 pages. Just say, and there was this, and then keep on going. And I do think it works. I do think trusting the reader to become a participant in the story works very well.
Any last questions, or should we wrap it up and start the other part? Okay. And one more?
Is there one more?
We love Shaman's Crossing.
Okay, the Soldier Son trilogy. It's no secret it was not as well received as other books I've written as Robin Hobb. I really enjoyed tinkering in that world. I've always been fascinated by how war is actually a culturally blending experience, whether we're talking about the British bringing tea back from India and curry, or we're talking about the cultivation of tomatoes and pumpkins from the New World to the Old.
Tobacco.
Tobacco's a big one. So it was just a topic that really, really fascinated me. There was also, I'm fascinated by how body images of what is beautiful and powerful varies so widely across the world. So I was tinkering with that too. I very much enjoyed Navarre and his story. Will I write more in that world? It's the same situation as it is with the Realm of the Elderlings. If I got a really compelling story, I wouldn't hesitate to go back to it. But right now it's just nicely rounded off, and I might just leave it there.
I loved it.
Oh, well, thank you.
So did I. It's really good.
Yes.
It's always surprising when somebody else has read it. Huh?
I've read all of your books.
Very hard on your characters, though.
They have the same kind of life you do. You know, when you're on the way to the job interview, you're wearing heels, you get a flat tire. And no phone reception. Do you have time for one more?
Sure.
Okay, one more.
I was just going to say that I've read the first and the third trilogies at least 5 times.
Oh,
Yep.
And every time Bert dies, I cry. Literally falls apart.
Spoiler.
Timothy?
Writers feel the same way about their characters. You know, it hits us just as hard. It's not an easy thing to write those events. And sometimes readers will say to me, "Why did you kill so and so?" And my answer is, I didn't kill anybody. I was there, and I watched it happen, and I recorded it. But no, I don't deliberately kill any of my characters.
The pen is mightier than the sword.
For you.